So before we have our next two experts on to join us to discuss legal and compliance, which are two very important issues here, I want to play a short clip from SEC Chairman Jay Clayton from earlier this summer discussing digital assets.
Let me start with the technology, distributed ledger technology. Incredible promise. It can drive efficiencies not only in the financial markets, but in a lot of markets. Fine. Two areas in the financial markets where distributed ledger technology has come to the fore. Cryptocurrencies. These are replacements for sovereign currencies, replace the dollar, the yen, the euro with Bitcoin. That type of currency is not a security. Let me turn to what's a security. A token, a digital asset, where I give you my money and you go off and make a venture. You have some company you want to start or something you want, and in return for me giving you my money, you say, you know what, I'm going to give you a return. Or you can get a return in the secondary market by selling your token to somebody. That is a security, and we regulate that. We regulate the offering of that security, and we regulate the trading of that security. And that's our job, and we've been doing it for a long time.
Yep. Now joining us, John Avidor and Tatiana. Thank you.
Hi, Shira. Thank you for having me.
Hi. John, I first want to ask you a question. You worked as an associate with the SEC Chairman Jay Clayton, who we just saw during your time at Sullivan and Cromwell in New York. Now, can you talk a bit about how that experience guided you through creating a legal framework for CityBlock Capital's digitized funds?
Sure. So, hi, Shira. So, as you mentioned, I worked with Jay Clayton when I was an associate at Sullivan and Cromwell. I think anyone who knows anything about Sullivan and Cromwell knows that it's one of the most conservative and oldest law firms in the country. Jay himself is applying a lot of that conservatism to his approach with securities law enforcement. But for me, coming out of there, it was really a base of knowledge and an understanding of how to apply laws to solve innovative problems. Now, a lot of innovators have come out of Sullivan and Cromwell. There's a colleague of mine who I worked with for many years was the first person to launch a cannabis company to be listed on the NASDAQ. You wouldn't expect that to be done from within the walls of Sullivan and Cromwell, but certainly folks who take that conservative approach to law and compliance and leave and do something innovative and interesting with it are able to succeed in accomplishing some amazing things. So what we've done at CityBlock Capital, what we've tried to do at CityBlock Capital is bring accessibility and liquidity to the venture capital markets. There's a real opportunity in private company investing, and we found that there's a demand for folks to participate in that in a way that didn't exist before. And that's probably because more companies are staying private longer. So I'm taking the conservative approach that I learned as an associate at Sullivan & Cromwell and really trying to innovate and stay in compliance, but push the boundaries a bit and really create something that creates value for shareholders and creates value for our fund investors.
Yeah, definitely, because now I think is the time to create that framework because there's a lot of questions happening, and I think the past year we've seen a lot of things slip through the cracks because there was a lack of compliance and sense of legality.
Right.
So definitely I think that's very important right now to get this industry to a place to be legitimate. Am I right? That was for John, but we'll continue.
Sorry, I was having some audio issues on this side.
No worries. Tatiana could add to this. So your background is in legal and investment banking, and you're now working on a digital securities offering around high-tech renewable energy plants, which I think is so cool. So when you were advising clients on entering the space, what key points do you stress on the legal and compliance side of the decision, which kind of goes back to the question I just had, how important that is, because we did see a lot of things, I think, the past year slip through the cracks.
Sure, thanks, Shira. So I think when we are tackling this market, we very often mix up what is a functional term versus what is a regulatory term. And security tokens has become one of those ambiguous terms because originally it was really a term function. It really referred to a digital equity or a digital bond or a digital derivative. And now it's become very much a regular term. So if we are living in a regulatory market where the majority of tokens will be classified as security tokens, then we have to subcategorize. So in that, you have your compliant network tokens, which are utility tokens issued within the boundaries of the US securities laws. And then you have your true smart securities, as we call them, which are real securities, but they're written into smart contracts and have the benefits of digital trading and liquidity. And if you're issuing the latter, which most of the folks in this interview are, it's really not that complicated. The SEC, the Securities Act has existed since 1933. It's not as ambiguous as folks try to make it out to be. And if you want to stay on the right side of law, it's not as difficult as it's often perceived. So my first piece of advice is issue the exact token that you need for your business model. So if your goal is to fundraise, don't try to create a ledger-based ecosystem because you will get into trouble that way. If your goal is to fundraise and distribute profits to your shareholders, then do create an equity token or some sort of royalty or a bond. Good projects will attract good investors and good partners. So if you're in that category, you have nothing to be afraid of.
Definitely. Now, what have been the most important legal challenges to date on issuing a digital security with CityBlock, John?
So we've basically taken the approach that the securities laws that have been in place for 80 plus years are still the laws that we need to follow. And regardless of comments that my former mentor Jay Clayton comes out and says to the world about how the SEC is open to changes to securities laws in the future, we are taking the path that compliance with what's existing today is the way to go. So the key challenges were finding the right exemptions that would allow us to issue a security under the 1933 Securities Act and Regulation D, and really thread the needle with the laws to provide accessibility and liquidity. Those two things are not necessarily in line specifically with the way the securities laws were written originally. And so we've taken the Jobs Act and the innovations that were made in 2012 under the Obama administration and some subsequent changes that were made just this past May under a rollback of Dodd-Frank under the Trump administration, and tried to really apply those items to what we're doing. The challenge has been threading that needle, understanding where we need to really weave through some of those regulations and some of the red tape to accomplish our goals on the business side, which are to provide an accessible and a liquid security that represents private company interests.
Yeah. How do you overcome these hurdles around adoption and trust, just as we wrap this up?
Yeah, adoption and trust are two main tenets of the framework on which we're building the company. I think adoption has, on a global level, allowed us to access more investors. So the adoption of blockchain technology and the adoption of cryptocurrency has allowed, as some of the previous guests have said, money to flow across global borders without financial intermediaries. And so adoption is a key component of what we're building, and we're really utilizing the growing adoption internationally of cryptocurrencies to bring accessibility to people.
Yes, and digital assets, more important.
Yeah.
Which we're trying to distinction here today.
Sure.
Right? Okay, well, John and Tatiana, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.